Hiya and welcome back. I'm recording this. We will be finished because yeah, we're not going to make it one today, but it shouldn't be too far into the afternoon anyway. We will be finished this session if we have like a 10-minute break before Tom comes. So Tom's coming at midday, just so that you sort of can concentrate and make the most of it. So I'll put a note by about 10 to 12 that I just want to have this bit wrapped up, and then we'll, after Tom, I'll just do the final section with you after we've had some lunch. Okay. So moving to my slides, so I'm recording again. We're looking at consumer psychology now, which it is quite fascinating actually, because it's trying to get under like how people think and behave. So consumer behaviour, it builds on the different research types that you've spoken about, the sort of behavioural, intention, understanding, observing. It's about really understand. It's built on psychology, but it's also got quite it looks, I mean, it looks at the sort of chemistry within people when they're buying, this sort of idea of just really what motivates people, and also looks at economics as well. And it sort of brings behavioural and cognitive all together, so that we sort of understand what they see, what stimulus, what shapes people's decisions, what actually motivates them, so energizes them to do something, how they retain memories. The process of memorization is actually really significant for marketing, because I keep mentioning about being top of mind. That's where you want to be. You don't want people thinking, where should we go out to eat? You want them thinking, oh, let's go to Bella Italia tonight, or Las Ganadas, whatever. But you just, so you want it straight there. But in order to do that, we need to understand, and this was where Jay was looking at the ethnographic characteristics of people, so the cultural, the social, but also personally what their drivers are as well. And then based on all that, they will look at certain alternatives, they will make certain decisions, and they will evaluate them afterwards. And there's a sort of a tip really in terms of marketing. People tend to focus their activity on drawing people to a particular product or service and to get them to engage with it. Whereas actually, one of the things that's really important is, after the purchase has been made, how's that long-lasting feeling? You know, what are you doing to cement? Because that builds loyalty if you get that right. So this also the purchase decision, you know, what they're going for off the menu, but also ultimately what brand are they going for before they get to the menu? You know, which location do they want to know? You know, what's their budget looking like? When are they in the position to do it? Is it a treat when they get paid every month? Is it a birthday celebration, or is it a weekly occurrence? So, and actually, a key thing now, well, I think people aren't going to be using cash anymore. So how's that all going to work if people are shifting, you know, if that's their preferred methods? Because some outlets are moving entirely, you know, that's not even an option. So payment method, but also broken down on that is if it's a credit card, that gives people longer to pay. So actually, we still go out for dinner, but I haven't been paid yet because I'm not having to pay for it for a couple of weeks, or a couple of weeks time. So it's things like that, or people buying it on credit, or are they buying it because they've got the means available already? So there's a lot going on for people to simply decide to go to a restaurant. But it's not just about that. It's just on every purchase decision, there's a lot of factors. So in terms of what shapes people, we've got personal ones, which are often seen as demographic actually. And as you mentioned, if we use Instagram, we're probably going to get a younger profile of person. Gender is quite an interesting one, because you'll notice if you do fill in the census, that now people's association with gender is becoming less a basis for segmentation, because you've got the sort of male identifying as female. And in marketing trends, Mintel 2030 talk about gender actually being totally irrelevant when it comes to selling to people. Culture, profession will matter, particularly in different countries. By the way, back to gender, I don't think that'll be everywhere. I think the UK is different on that. I think some more traditional countries with certain religions, I don't see that changing anytime soon. Psychological is how we interpret it, so how we understand our own needs, our processing, our attitudes, and then socially is our sort of reference groups, if you like, our friends, can be on social media, but also the money that we've got, our education level, our likelihoods, the connections that we've got in terms of, I'd like to go out for somewhere to eat, where would you recommend, and who we're going to ask. And then geographically as well, that will shape our needs, our wants, our palates actually as well. So if we're opening up one of the restaurants in somewhere that's a lot hotter or colder, their menu options are likely to be quite different as well. Almost like the heaviness of the food, whether it's more of a comfort food or whether it's a lighter meal. So question to you, these 4 influences for consumer behaviour, which do you reckon are the most, if we were to pick one of these, which do you think influences people most? Can you see my slide, by the way? Just thinking you can't.
No, we can see you.
That's so nice, and I'm so animated because I'm enjoying it. I'm so sorry. I thought this got no red line around it. Let's go back. Right, okay. So I read these to you. So now you can read them yourself. No, which out of those 4 do you think which is the most important in terms of shaping people's behaviour?
I'm torn between 2.
Go on, which 2?
Personal factors and social factors.
Okay, yeah. I think particularly for a restaurant experience, actually. I think if it was something more personal, then the psychological factors would, because it's quite a sort of outward consumption, isn't it?
Yeah.
I think
Anyone else?
Psychological.
Do you think psychological?
Yeah.
Okay. Why do you think that?
Just like as it says, everyone's response to a particular marketing campaign will base on their perceptions and attitudes. So obviously, because we're trying to get people to eat out, that's obviously going to be from.
That's true.
Yeah.
I think social factors probably have the biggest one.
I think traditionally social factors was probably the one for eating out. I think psychological comes more into it as well at the moment because people are at different stages with like their views on the stuff around just getting out, never mind eating out. Yeah, okay. Any others? What do you think?
I kind of feel like geography will also impact it as well.
Okay.
Like, are you going to be willing to drive this far away to go eat out? Or people who don't have a car, like, are they going to want to go a certain distance just to go and eat out?
Or if it's a city centre location, as I just heard, like the public transport could shape. So it's sort of accessibility, isn't it, as well as the location. So actually, if it's in Birmingham city centre, people might want, as part of their experience, they want to go into. But yeah, I think that could shape, because that shapes the whole. It's the sort of interaction with the environment as well, doesn't it? And actually, if people are going out to eat out and then go to, I know not now, but go to the theatre or go for drinks, that's where geography could really make a big difference as well, couldn't it? Because it depends on the total experience they're going for.
Yeah. But just touching on the public transport thing, obviously people are a lot more wary using public transport now.
Oh gosh, yeah,
obviously in the current crisis, but I think when you kind of going out, like when you're eating out, they like a lot. I ate out during the pandemic when it was the eat out to help out.
Yeah.
And there's always these extra measures put into place, so like the extra sanitizing, things like that. But that might not necessarily be the case on public transport, so people might be a bit reluctant to.
Yeah.
which then would impact on whether they're going to go out altogether, potentially.
Yeah. Isn't it straight? Because there are so many things that were so marketing is about basically teaching messages and reinforcing them, repeating until they go into our minds. And what you were saying about public transport, then we were all taught, weren't we? Really, we were very much encouraged not to use our own transport, to use public transport wherever possible. And then it's almost like gone the opposite, hasn't it? In the sense of actually, if you can use your own, it seems safer. People are, so it's sort of. Because I don't know what measures are in place, as you say there, but the same thing with reusing bags and things, wasn't it? It was all about that, and then in the pandemic, it was almost you want as few touch points as possible. Do you know what I mean? It's sort of almost everything we've been taught. It's shifted, hasn't it? Some of the behaviours are really shifting. So this is interesting anyway, just in terms of people's reactions to environmental. And actually, if you were, so based on your personality profile, if you're somebody that's very self-confident, things like your reference groups probably matter less, in the sense of you're still connected with them, but actually if one of your friends doesn't like Cafe Rouge, then that's fine, but it isn't going to stop me going, because so it does depend on you individually as well. So this sort of personal factor here, your interests and opinions. So we've spoken about social factors. We feel that could have a huge influence in terms of their decision where to eat out. And actually this whole thing with culture as well. So some cultures are more collective, also even some religions than others are more individualistic, and actually that sort of collective culture is more likely to want to eat out in bigger groups, in which point, again, if we've got, are we still going to be, in terms of eating out, when we're allowed to do that, are we still limited in terms of numbers, or are we going to, is it just anything?
I think it's rule of 6.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. So for big sort of 50th birthday parties or things like that, where you might want 20 people, it's not going to happen, is it? Okay. Yeah, so this does shape, because actually if we've got that, then we might be looking at other alternatives then, if we're not allowed, in terms of like how we see the group being. So yeah, just have a think. These are all quite interesting because they do form our opinions. Do you think our status impacts where we might eat out in terms of like our job role? Or not really?
I think it depends. Sorry, Krishma.
No, you go ahead.
I think it depends on the person. I don't know. I know some, it's just, I don't know. Like personally, not really for me, but other people are different. Like some people are some people can be quite materialistic, can't they? And if they think that if people see them eating at a cheap restaurant, people are going to think they're cheap, but other people don't care. I think it depends on the person.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So that's back to the personal factors, isn't it? In terms of class, who do you think what makes people more self-confident and less careless? Do you think there's anything that shapes that?
Isn't it like how you see yourself? Like,
yeah.
And maybe your upbringing as well, and what your family are like. If your family are a bit more like that, you might be more like that as well.
Yeah, and sort of wanting validation by other people. There's an argument that when people are more successful, earn more, etc., they don't care as much, which is why the sort of reverse psychology for somewhere like Aldi, as though I live on a nice estate in Rugby, not good property prices, all that sort of thing. Aldi does really well around here, and the reason being, people don't care because they're quite, to me, they don't care to be seen as somewhere that's sort of value, because it doesn't matter, because it doesn't diminish their sense of self. So I think there's a level of confidence, whereas people, when they're aspirational and they want reassurance, they want to be associated with the right brands, whereas you sort of get to a certain point where you just have the brand you like. It doesn't matter as much. So yeah, but that's personal, that really is. So in these reference groups, can you think of an example of a membership group that might shape your behaviour?
Do you mean like group, like you have to have a membership to get in? Or does it mean like a different thing?
Yeah, so it could be
so like a gym or something.
Yeah, exactly. So it could be a gym, it could be your football team, it could be a political party. Actually, you might need because there's people who carry cards if they're in certain political parties. Any ideas what a primary group might be?
Is that like sort of regulars almost?
I think it's where you're really closely connected with it. So I think it's like where you're it's almost like your family or something like that. So you're sort of where you really see yourself fit in. So whereas a secondary group, so it's a group held together by, I've just looked at relationships formed by family and environmental associations. So it's basic to social life and culture. So family could be could be that. So a secondary group in that case is going to be one that's a little bit further away from that. So it's contacts, but it's detached and impersonal. So who might be a secondary group? Think about yourself. So who's sort of people that you're aware of, but you're not so close to?
The people you work with.
Could be if you're not, yeah, if you sort of almost don't socialise that much, or you know, because they're not, yeah, but it isn't that you don't like them or anything, they're just, you know, they're just my colleagues. It might even be people in a different department that you don't have a huge amount to do with. Aspirational groups, so these are ones that you'd like to be part of or that you look up to. Any ideas how this could work for marketing or who they might be?
I want to say like loyalty schemes, like certain brands might have like a certain, like you reach a certain level and then you get this sort of thing, and like some people might want to be part of that.
Potentially, especially if it's like a frequent flyer, it's seen to be the elite. I think it's all, go on, sorry.
No, go on.
I was just going to say, it's like the social media influencers and things. I think it's people where you want to be like them. You're never necessarily going to be like it, but I think it's people that you sort of listen to, and it's not necessarily one you'll ever be part of, if that makes sense. What were you thinking?
Yeah, I was thinking sort of similar to that, or you're kind of like sort of almost like your entry level thing, like thing to the brand almost. Like you may be able to, I'm just trying to think of like a designer brand, and say if you have that influence and you have that aspiration to kind of get that, like the more sort of lower down the range stuff you might be able to achieve.
Yeah, and there was Austin Reed. I think they still exist online, but I absolutely loved their sort of suits and things, and used to always buy them for work. And they're really they were expensive, but if you sort of bought them, the sales and stuff, it wasn't so bad. But they always had like they didn't call it basic, but basically it was an entry level sort of for, you know, professionals that wanted to be part of it. But it makes it accessible to you. So yeah, you see yourself as part of it, and you're trying to sort of almost buy your way in. And then disassociative groups are ones that we don't want to be seen as part of. Can you think of any examples of these?
Maybe a non-ethical brand. Or
Yeah,
a
it
brand
could,
that doesn't operate ethically.
or it could. Abercrombie and Fitch had. I'm not even sure I said it right. They had quite a negative campaign about, because they were sort of seen as quite elitist and quite prejudiced against people that weren't like tiny slim or things. So it's sort of that through, and they had a lot of campaigners against them as well. So it could, these are ones where, you know, if something happens and they're sort of almost protesting, but it's for things that we really, really don't, you know, agree with. So it's sort of where we want to, we if they were to do something, we want to do the opposite, if that makes sense. So whether it's sort of some protest or something, but we're not part of that. So it's worth understanding these, because actually this is about word of mouth, and it's about understanding where people get their sources of information, but also their reference points. So I've mentioned before the role of, so motivation is basically, we have to have some energy to do whatever we're going to do. So it can sometimes be a positive motivation, or sometimes it can be away from a situation that we don't like. Our perception is very much the glasses that we put on in terms of like the way we see the world. So it's not necessarily a fact, but it might be. We've already said we perceive Café Rouge as an old person's brand. And actually, if we got the data, it might be the average age of, because think about Radio 4 is also seen as like an old person's brand, but the average age is in the low 30s, I think. So the perception doesn't always match the reality, in which case, you know, a promotional campaign is needed. Learning is where we're trying to repeat messages to get them, to embed them in the memory. So that's the role of the jingle. So the McDonald's, I'm loving it, that sort of thing, where we're constantly trying to sort of get people to remember something. So these are all important in terms of like understanding campaigns. And then something else that I find, like, as I've mentioned this before, but actually that after the purchase, what we want to do is make sure that people feel it was worth doing. And so they don't think, oh, you know, I just got that budget, it's so-and-so's birthday, we've gone out, the 6 of us, to celebrate, and I really wish we'd chosen somewhere else. So we want to make sure that people in their experience, it should be threatened, are happy with it, because then they're going to post a review. And this is a really good point to mention something called the peak end effect. So peak as in like a peak in our experience. So there's been there's a lot of sort of emphasis now on behavioural economics, and it's sort of the way we think and then the way we behave and purchase things. Just 1 second, I think I'm just about to have a coughing fit. So there was this research done, and it was about 2 situations they looked at in this experiment. One was where they did a colonoscopy, so inserting tubes into not very nice places and just like really uncomfortable. It was a 15-minute procedure, and what they did was they extended 50% of them by another 5 minutes. And what they did in that 5 minutes was they wiggled it very little, the sort of thing. So actually it was 5 minutes longer, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was just a bit longer. And they found on their research that the people who had it for 5 minutes longer, even though it was a longer duration, were more satisfied and more likely to be happy to have it again than the ones that had it just for 15 minutes, but it was all bad. Another example of this, and I'll explain what they're actually showing in a sec, is there's a hotel in America, and it's not particularly amazing, but what they do is it's really expensive. They have a popsicle helpline, so it's like an ice lolly helpline, and anytime, night or day, you can ring the ice lolly helpline and someone comes, like a butler, with white gloves and offers you a tray of any ice lolly you like, and you get to pick. And what and so as a result, their feedback is excellent. So what it's worth, the reason why I mention this is the idea behind it is every experience we have has peaks. We cannot remember an experience with the same level of intensity throughout. So really, really good brands, what they do is they identify what those peaks are going to be. So actually what they did by extending the colonoscopy was to reduce the overall pain in terms of the time and thing. And actually they realised that the end point was like, oh, that's not that bad after all. So this idea of post-purchase satisfaction, what we need to do is to consider towards the end of the purchase, how we can build in an amazing experience, a peak end. Because as well, if you look on TripAdvisor and look at hotel reviews, they tend to be about the breakfast. So they're about the last bit. They're not about the room. They're not about the stay. They're about the quality of the breakfast. And I remember going to stay somewhere and they just ran out of breakfast. They couldn't, or their kitchen wasn't working. They couldn't give us a breakfast. And I was like, their reviews are going to be awful as a result of that. And the hotel had been lovely, but it was just that it's the peak end. So that's worth knowing. It's called the peak end effect, and it was somebody who won the Nobel Prize for economic behavioral economics who researched it and found it out. Something else that's worth considering is the difference in marketing between marketing to consumers and marketing to businesses. And the reason this is really important is because the casual dining group has got franchises, so they are marketing to they're marketing to business owners, if you like. And with businesses, if you're selling to businesses, you can't get them, you can't sort of stimulate trends in the same way. You're very much reliant on their sort of what business they're getting in. And so I don't necessarily think that's the same way with the franchises. But if you think about, if you were selling fleet cars, you're not going to be selling them if the company is if the companies you're selling them to are concerned about budgets, or if they're they're going to be looking at reducing their outlay rather than buying new cars. So you're sort of stuck really, because there's nothing you can do. So business to business is really quite difficult, because it's not necessarily about price, it's about what's going on in their world. And if there's something really bad going on, there's not a huge amount you can do. Does that make sense? Does Aston Martin sell much business to business, or is it purely business to consumer?
Business to consumer, I think.
Yeah. Do they have any? Do they do any sort of fleets? Or I imagine even the business owners will probably just buy a couple of them through. It won't be like a huge deal, will it? I don't know.
No, I don't think so.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So it's less relevant really, and this is less relevant as well. So we won't go through. If we were selling business to business, like if people who are supplying you as an Aston Martin, they have to adhere to a lot more, like really adhere to a lot of standards. Whereas consumers, it's not like we've obviously got to do all the legal things, but it's very different in terms of shorter decisions, bigger numbers of people, but quick sales. We can do a sales promotion. So McDonald's do geo-targeting on their phones. So if you're near a McDonald's restaurant and you've got the app, you should get a special offer telling you that at the store, which is 3 minutes away from you, you could buy this. That's never going to work business to business. Give them a price discount. If they don't need it, they don't need it. They're not going to be buying it. Should we go a little bit onto this, and then we'll have like 10-15 minutes before Tom? Does that sound okay? So then we can...
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So on the consumer psychology, do you just sort of get that basically there's a variety of different factors here? This is really the key point. I think that sums it up, and it's working out for the restaurants market which of those you feel are going to be shaping people's decisions. And I think we thought psychology is going to be really helpful, but actually social and personal is probably going to make a big difference, and the geographical location is going to matter too. And then just sort of went through those in a bit more depth. So, Porter's 5 forces, have you done this in other modules?
Yeah.
Okay, have you done it to death? Or
A few times, yeah.
Yeah, a few times. It's like if we sort of have to keep going through change again, which we will at some point. Okay, let's consider it for the casual dining group then. So, at the moment, do you think their suppliers, because their suppliers are going to be like fresh produce providers, aren't they, and that sort of thing, and how much bargaining power do you think they're going to have been impacted by COVID?
Yes.
Yeah.
Massively, I reckon. So I don't reckon the supplier's going to have a huge amount of power over them at the moment.
Mm-hmm.
Potential entrants, do you think anyone's actually setting up restaurants at the moment?
No.
I'd like to say no, but I've seen a few pop up where I live, which I found really weird.
I've noticed it as well. What sort of, were they independents or what were
They're
they
just
like?
independents, like coffee shops and like cake shops and stuff. But you can go in and have a cake and sit down and have a cake and a coffee. And then I've also seen there's a new Greek restaurant opening as well. So it's a bit like, okay, this is a bit of a weird time to be setting up a
Isn't
restaurant.
it just? I wonder if they're getting like discounted rates or something. It is, isn't it? Especially when we're not quite sure if we're going to be able to stay open. Okay. So we're seeing some movement, but not lots of new entrants. What is going on in the, I mean, we'll know more when when you're looking at the research, industry research from Tom, but what would you say, what's actually going on within the industry? How, are people going, out of business, are restaurants closing? What's happening?
It's about survival at the moment rather than trying to expand or progress. It's just about survival.
So what changes have, are there any chains that have gone under? Because I think there are.
They've gone under, but there probably has been, yeah.
Let's just have a look. I'm sure. So even before COVID, we got like the likes of like Jamie Oliver's restaurant was going down the pan, wasn't it? Do you remember any of this? Sorry, gone. I think it's shrinking. I think it's a shrinking marketplace. Restaurants gone bust 2020. Obviously, a very academic source. Okay. A list of shops that have what's gone under. I am sure there's quite a lot because retail, if you were struggling anyway, it was just the worst year ever, wasn't it?
Didn't Debenhams go
Oh,
into
Debenhams,
administration? Yeah.
I mean, they've still got a Blue Cross sale going because they never get rid of it, do they? But yeah, they're properly gone. Bon Marché have gone. Arcadia Group went into administration.
Didn't they?
Yeah, Topshop, Top Group, Peacocks and Jaeger. They're like the different extremes, aren't they? Jaeger's like expensive. Edinburgh Wool Mill, M&Co. We haven't got any actual restaurants at the moment. Peter Jones China, okay. Benson's for beds, Harvey's Furniture. Blimey, it's a bad year, wasn't it? Go Outdoors. They go under, but they come back, don't they? So you never know they have. They get bought by someone else. Le Pan Quotidien, which means the daily bread. I'm not seeing restaurants. I'm seeing a lot of other retailers. Debenhams, as you say, Cath Kidston. God, shocking, wasn't it? So if the industry is shrinking in terms of restaurant chains reducing, what do you think that's good? We've got less choice, or do you think it reduces the market as a whole?
I think it works both ways because the less choice you have, the quicker your decision is going to be on where you want to eat. But then if you have limited choice, you're less likely to go somewhere.
Yeah, and I think there's something about if you've got less, if you've got less choice, and you're less likely to do it regularly, if that makes sense. Because so I'm working with someone on their marketing about the horse treats, and they're saying actually the more we get it out there, the more demand there is for everybody, because it's like encouraging people to do something unless you've got. So I just think in terms of industry competitors, you've got a shrinking landscape, but I think in terms of what the options are available, and they're struggling as well, aren't they? The restaurants in there. I think the casual dining group is really struggling, which is why why they were bought out, wasn't it? By what's it called now? Is it Top Table?
Big Table.
Big Table. Okay. Statista have got daily restaurant dining decline 2021. We're going to see Statista soon, so there's going to be trends on that. Obviously because of the pandemic, but actually I think they're expecting it to continue. This change. We've already mentioned substitutes. What are they likely to be?
Takeaways and
home dining as well, isn't it?
Yeah.
Get a barbecue out. you know, the fact that people are sort of more comfortable entertaining at home. God, they've all learned how to bake, haven't they? You know, there's sort of more pride in that. And then do you think consumers have got more power now?
I think a lot of people have started to do click and collect, haven't they? So they still want to eat out as such by getting something in, but just not have to sit somewhere and have it.
So they want it on their terms, don't they, really?
Yeah.
Okay, yep. So actually that, in terms of the place, because we're looking at the marketing mix in a future ones, the product, place, price, promotion, the distribution's actually changed quite a lot, hasn't it?
Yeah.
Okay, so it says that dining in restaurants went down like 52% or 82%, which no wonder really, because you couldn't eat in, could you? So it's going to be down. As of March the 17th, 2021, the year-over-year decline of seated restaurants in the UK compared to 2019 was 99.71%. There's no shocker, is it? Stuff like that's going to be quite good. That was Statista for your report, isn't it? Because what you almost want to do is you want to make the problem worse, if that makes sense. Do you know what I mean? Because you want to sort of amplify. You know, we've got a real situation here. So who would you say their restaurants are? Their restaurants, their competitors.
Yeah, like places in the same sort of price point, so like Nando's and yeah.
Yep. Yeah, another one we could do with asking Tom on, isn't it? Sort of if we can do like a competitor, so market share, but also like a competitor analysis. One of the tools you've got as well, you can actually do a SWOT on it, one of the databases. So we'll ask him about that. So then we can look at like what they've got that's good about them. And then we need to work out what strategies are available. So this takes marketing to a strategic level. And this is, so you can rank yourselves against your competitors. And we're saying competitors based on, I think it's price point and appeal, isn't it, as well? So sort of quite a sort of similar target market. And then we rate each of the competitors based on what matters to their customers. So we can see how are we on a number of factors. So that could be one way that we look at research, how are we performing on these things. Right, have you recognised, look at the coloured boxes and tell me, do you recognise any of those? The 4, do you know where they come from? Do you recognise them?
One of
Yay!
Porter's other models.
Porter's many models. It's called Porter's generic strategies. And we'll have a look at this. This is how we're going to conclude after Tom. So let me just see how much there is to conclude after Tom, because then I can work out whether we should. Do you know what? There's not very much. Shall I whistle through it? And then once Tom's done, we're done. How's that sound?
Yeah, okay.
Is it all right, or would you prefer to go?
I really don't mind.
I'm easy.
Well, that's nice to hear. Let's do that. And then if you say to me, didn't get it, would like to go over it slower, we'll do that. Cost leadership is where we're stripping out money. Okay, so, and then we're passing it on to the customer. Aldi do this by having a limited range of products. Okay. So it's not, so they're trying to do it on a mass market level. So it's about there, and then they can keep their price points relatively low compared to the quality of the product. A cost focus is where we've got a smaller market. So we're still focusing on building the best value, but actually we're not trying to appeal to everyone. So Toyota does that. Differentiation is about added value. So differentiation is to a mass market again. So we're focusing on the product there, and we'll look at this in more detail. Differentiation focus is not a mass market. So they go mass market, smaller market, mass market, smaller market. And I suppose this is where we need to think about the 3 brands you've got. Where should they sit? Should they be mass market, or with one of them, do we go for a focused but a significant focus, if that makes sense, the one that we can really gain attraction in for being different? So either cost or it's about quality, so that's where it goes. So we've got the 4 Ps, the marketing 4 Ps that give this competitive advantage. So we're looking at those in terms of the product, the place, how we get it to people and the distribution, and how we're pricing it. So if we're looking at the product itself, what we need to consider there is actually how does it perform relative to other ones and what's the value to the customer? Does it last well? So Aldi do try, even though they're competing on price, they try to compete on product quality. M&S operate in the same territory but at a higher price, you know. But I think, have you got more confidence in M&S products or Aldi if you were going to eat for food?
Yeah, generally M&S.
Would you? And why would you say?
Yeah.
What gives you that high level of assurance?
I think sometimes just that pricing point, you know, as a consumer, you think it's a high price, it must be good.
It's not just a normal price, it's an
Yeah.
M&S price, isn't it?
Well, that, and I've shopped at Aldi, and the amount of times we've bought fresh chicken, got home and cooked it the same day or the day after, and it smelled awful. It's like, yeah, you never, and I've never had that when I bought chicken from Tesco's or M&S.
I agree. On their fresh stuff, I cannot believe that they keep winning like fresh food retailer, because
I don't get it because it's not
by the
nice.
time
All
you get
the
it
frozen
home,
stuff's amazing, but all the
yeah,
fresh stuff's not so good.
by the time you get it home, it's gone out. Yeah, it's gone off. So yes, agreed on that. However, on the general product lines, when supermarkets are comparing their quality and it's sort of like blind testing, Aldi is the pinnacle. It's not M&S anymore. But actually, because of the price queue, we perceive it to be M&S, don't we? But I agree about the experience about the fresh stuff. So how do we get this advantage on the product? And this is where I think which brands do you think have got an advantage on their product? Any brands that you think of that are just ace it?
Probably like, I'm thinking like home appliances like Samsung and stuff, or like Simmons or companies like that. And like
Okay.
they've just built that high reputation, and you know, like that's where I want to go.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, because it's a perceptual thing, isn't it? But also they need to deliver on it, and it's about confidence. There's a lot of perception in there, but product is a way to get a differentiation advantage. So price isn't necessarily about cheaper, it's about different pricing options, but how you give it, it gives you an advantage. We've already heard that actually sometimes higher price gives us more confidence, doesn't it? Can you think of brands that do well, not because they're priced cheaply, but because they give a range of payment options?
It's places like Very, they do like payment plans, don't they? And
Yeah, and have you heard of Bright House?
yeah,
I think they're quite unethical, because actually if you go in store, which you obviously can't, which is really good, but people could go in and they're like, I really want one of those, and they just buy it, don't they, because it's only X amount of pounds a week, but it's not. So I think pricing is a way of making something accessible even if people don't have the money. And credit facilities, this is why we have had so many new car sales for a number of years in the UK, because people had access to it. It's like PCP but basically the payment plans. And it wasn't because people owned any of them, was it? It was because it allowed you access to it through a different way of paying. So price can give an advantage, not just because it's cheap. I mean, sometimes it is because, and value brands are growing, like value car brands are growing as well, because actually people do want this value. Who do you think aces it when it comes to distribution and getting it to us? Which brands do you think do really well on that?
Amazon.
Yeah, I was going to say Amazon is the one, isn't it?
Rob.
Yeah. And do you know who Argos tried to compete with them? Do you know this? They've spent quite a lot of money. So Argos have got a delivery thing now where you can get it within an hour if you deliver something on a certain day. So if your TV breaks, you can get a new one within an hour. And they've done that deliberately to try and compete with Amazon, because they've realised the distribution is a way forward. And speed. If you go into store and you've already paid for it and ordered it, that you should be able to get it within a certain, whether it's 1 or 2 minutes, it should be very, very fast. People don't like waiting, do they? You know, they don't. And even when we didn't have home deliveries as much, they blended online, offline, where you could order it and then go into store in your lunch hour and collect it. That really gave places an edge. And places like Debenhams, obviously, sort of Debenhams, rest in peace. Like down the road in Rugby, they had one set up, and I think that was more of a click and collect than anywhere else. So yeah, so just how distribution can do it for us, and then promotion. So actually, can you think of any brands that are amazing in terms of their advertising, that you think actually do it really well, and we think they are superior to everything else because of it?
It's always the ones that you remember. So,
Yeah.
like the Go Compare Man, even though he's pretty annoying, you do remember it. The whole opera singing and all that.
Absolutely, and that's, you know, that memorization and learning. Go compare. And now they've brought him into his personality, haven't they? They've brought him in as a real person, who he is. So that works well in terms of repetition. I'll tell you a brand I think that does advertising incredibly. I think Coca-Cola do it really well. I think, you know, because they can just use the same thing every year, can't they? You know, bring out a lorry at Christmas, but they're Christmas, aren't they? Do you know what I mean? So even if you don't particularly feel it's sort of they've invested so much in building their brand, it doesn't take much extra, does it? Do you know what I mean? To remind us and then potentially nudge us to buying Coca-Cola at Christmas.
And for barbecues and stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, yeah, especially when we're inviting people around. Do you know what I mean? Because if we're inviting people around, we're you know, people are seeing our purchases. And then just in terms of how we respond to competition, you know, whether you're conflicting, I think really what you want to be doing with eating out is encouraging the market, not this. So you recognise your competitors, you see what they're doing, but actually you go into different segments, and that way there's not, and you look at different territories as well. So you're creating more of a demand. If you open up a restaurant next to another restaurant, it doesn't necessarily, I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing, because actually then you become an area where people might go to eat out, and one week they might use yours, the next week another one. So I just think competition isn't always a bad thing, and I think for the eating out we need to bring up the economy. Do you know what I mean? We need to stimulate that rather than as a starting point, and then they'll move to your restaurant. Should we have like five minutes, 10 minutes? Can you come back for 12, and then we'll be with Tom then, and then when Tom finishes, if you want anything, I'm going to be around, just send me a message and I'll log back onto Teams. Does that sound all right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to save the recording. I'll record Tom's as well with his permission, but I'll see you back in at 12. Okay, thank you.